This is episode number 71, featuring a painting legend. I'm telling you, this guy's a legend. His name is Ralph Oberg. Welcome to the PleinAir podcast from PleinAir Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhodes. I'm the publisher and the founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we dive deeply into the world of outdoor painting called plein air painting. For those who don't know, plein air is a French term which essentially means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein, others say plain. It doesn't matter how you say it, plein or plain. It's a huge movement of artists, and there's nothing plain about it. This show is all about that movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and the art. I call it the new golf. This podcast is sponsored by the African Painting Safari. Imagine going to Africa, getting to see the animals, get to take lots of photographs, see the incredible scenery of South Africa, which is totally safe. This is a beautiful place. Things like Tabletop Mountain, Victoria Falls, beautiful, beautiful scenery. And we're going to paint in those places, take you some of the wineries. It is a really great trip. You're going to love it. But it's limited to 50 people. You can bring a spouse or partner, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going in September, but you got to get your paperwork done now. So if you have any interest, check it out, africanpaintingsafari.com. Well, of course, it's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting. You can help by sharing this podcast with your friends on social media or email. If you have comments, email me, Eric at pleinairmagazine.com. The interview is also brought to you by the Plein Air Convention, which is right around the corner. If you're listening to this when it's produced, it's like next week. Yeah, 10 days or so. April 16th through 20th in Santa Fe. If there are any seats left, you'll have to check the website because I recorded this earlier. But we now have 83 top artists to teach you and work with you. Indoors, we have sessions, great big screens you can see on 4 different stages, all kinds of training. And then we all go outside and paint together. We have people to work with you in the field when we're outside. And it is a blast, and it's historic. You'll be part of something, the largest group of people painting simultaneously together in history. Nothing like it has ever happened. So, transform your painting skills, make some great new friends, whether you're a beginner or not, it doesn't matter. We have a pre-convention course for beginners. We had last year, we had about 100 people who came, had never painted before in their life, never picked up a paintbrush. They bought all their materials at the convention. They learned how to paint. They did their first paintings. Bravo for these people. You can be one of them next time. So come check us out, pleinairconvention.com. Well, let's get right to our interview with the amazing Ralph Oberg. Well, I'm honored today to have Ralph Oberg on with us. Ralph has been one of my heroes in painting and plein air painting. He's just one of the great studio painters and plein air painters of our generation, and is going to go down in history as one of the great painters of all time, I believe. Ralph, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric. You're very generous.
Well, and you're very modest, but you're certainly one of my heroes. And, it's interesting how somebody like yourself can inspire somebody like me. Who inspired you early on when you started painting, and who inspires you now?
Well, when I came to the idea that I needed to paint outdoors, which, I heard suggested many times after I had spent many years practicing my mistakes as a young man, artists like Wayne Wolf and Clyde Aspavig probably came first, who really tell me that I had to go outdoors to learn what the world looks like and to get away from my photographs for a while.
So somebody who might be listening who's just kind of starting painting, can you articulate why that's important and why you continue to encourage people to do that now?
Well, simply because to get the real feeling as well as the real values and the real colors of the world, if you're interested in trying to capture a sense of place in your outdoor paintings or in your paintings, you need to go outdoors. I mean, it's simply because the photograph lies to you in so many ways that we don't often realize until we've painted outdoors for a while. If you look, we've sort of been raised to believe that the photograph is a perfect image. But in reality, after you've painted outdoors for a while and you bring your photograph and your painting home and you look at them side by side, you realize that there's a huge amount of difference.
Well,
it's about color.
There's kind of a joke among some of us, we'll be out painting and someone will walk up and say, "Oh, your painting looks just like a photograph." And I know they mean well, but that's not the goal.
But it's the kiss of death, I know.
So in terms of...
Simply because people believe, that a photograph has to be accurate. And the reality is that film and even digital photography, although it's much better, certainly a single shot can never give you everything you need. Now, yes, we all use cameras and we all do, take multiple exposures and try to pull things together, but the sense that you get outdoors is really the only way to understand those lies that the camera gives you.
Now, you live in Colorado. Do you go out plein air painting in the wintertime?
Not as much as I used to. I'm getting on in years, and I do focus more and more here later in my career on my studio paintings. I still go out to paint a little bit, but mostly in the summertime. I'm trying to get out right now, but I just have commitments that are keeping me indoors for the time being. But I do sort of coordinate that with the winter, so that makes it easier for me. I have painted outdoors in the winter a lot, and yes, it's beautiful and it's evocative, but it's also cold.
Yeah. That's about as far as I go. It's about 50 degrees, and then I stop.
I'm pretty much a fair weather painter these days outdoors.
But thank goodness there are people like Redmond who went out in the middle of winter for most of his life and put together those incredible paintings.
Oh, absolutely. And, and those New England fellas, they would go out and paint New England winters and everything, and it was pretty impressive. But, of course, they probably did small sketches and then went indoors and did their larger paintings, and just like most of us do. And, and so that's probably the key idea that I've grown into over my years. Yes, I started out doing a lot of with the Papa group on Catalina when we were the only one, and then I did a series of years where I did a lot of other plein air shows that were starting to pop up around the country. But at one point there, I decided to drop out of that, and in part and that goes alongside with my active workshop teaching, which I did for many years as well. Just reached a point where I realized that I needed to work on my own work too, and so as much as I enjoyed teaching and enjoyed doing those shows, I realized that for me, I needed to focus on my own work in a more complete manner and not be so disjointed by all of these other possibilities for a career, So, and that's been a good decision for me because it settled me down, it slowed me down, it's made me think about what's important to myself and what I enjoy doing, and not chasing the carrot on a stick all over the country.
Yeah, well, that's a tough life, and for some, of course, it's the only way that paintings get sold. But moving from city to city that's tough. So you have
absolutely, and all these plein air shows are wonderful in that they provide a market for young artists, and God knows I needed that opportunity as well, and to develop their work. But you got to be able to go beyond that now and spend part of your life working in your studio as well as doing outdoor shows and just plein air, because those little paintings, as wonderful as they are, should be and could be a stepping stone to greater things too. So.
Well, let's talk about that, because you have said that plein air is not a means unto itself. You have some feelings about the current movement and what artists maybe should be considering. This is a good time to talk about that.
Okay. I'm not really denigrating anything. I'm just saying that I think that people who limit themselves strictly to plein air and strictly to plein air shows as their marketing are missing the opportunity to develop, into a more rounded artist.
So, how does one become? Uh, I don't know if there's a way to ask this question appropriately because it sounds so stupid when it comes out of my mouth. But how does one become at the level that you've become, where you have gone way, way, way beyond where you were originally, and you continue to grow, and you're getting, you've got a great reputation. Your work is in major shows, major galleries. You're at the top tier level. How does one accomplish that?
The only ones that lose are the ones that quit. I've been at it since I was 19, and I'm 60, almost 68 now. So I've got a few years behind me, and really you have to acknowledge the fact that I had to acknowledge the fact that as a self-taught artist in my early years, I had an ignorant teacher. And by taking workshops with working artists that I admired, Clyde and Skip and Hollis Williford and Lynch Meal and Jim Reynolds and, all of the greats that I could get around when I was trying to get started, that's when I finally started to learn things. And I took that input because I didn't get to a decent art school or anything like that when I was young. So I had to learn the hard way, and I did. I spent a lot of years practicing my mistakes, as I like to say. And it takes persistence, and it takes determination, and also the fact that I can't do anything else. I just pretty much had to do it.
So there's a sense for some that being a self-taught artist is kind of a badge of courage, and yet over and over and over again, I hear these people that say that they elevated their work dramatically once they started studying under other people.
Absolutely. This is, painting in general is really a difficult thing to do, and painting outdoors is twice as hard in a lot of ways. And so it does. We have to learn from each other. And if Clyde and those guys hadn't offered the time and energy that they had to expend to give me the opportunity and their other students, I wouldn't have had a chance. And so I absolutely bow down to all those greats that I've had the good fortune to spend many weeks with, and in most cases turned them into friends in the long run. So, and by painting with people that you admire and going out and working together, we're always sharing and always learning from each other. So there is a community aspect. I tend to be a little bit of a hermit at times, and I just need to get out and get out with my buddies once in a while to see what's going on and to practice and get that old energy in there where, there's almost that little bit of a competitive nature where we all want to show our best when we're out with our friends. It makes you put your good foot forward. And besides, it's just one of the joyful parts of being an artist, and because then you got to go back and spend time alone in the studio, and it takes a lot of time to do that.
So I have to call you on the carpet just a little bit, because a few minutes ago you said you weren't teaching anymore and not doing workshops, and yet you're a national treasure when it comes to landscape painting. So you obviously made that decision so you can focus on your work. But are you planning on doing any teaching in the future?
Well, yes, of course. There is the workshop that the Papa Group is doing down in Cartersville at the Booth Museum late in March, which will be the first time I've put myself in that situation for 10 years, probably.
Wow.
And,
so that everybody listening needs to jump on that opportunity fast.
Yeah, they better do it quick.
I may be the first to sign up.
And there are a few openings left, although there's over 70 people, I believe, that are part of this thing. And of course, a stellar lineup of painters. My peers, Skip Whitcomb, Lynch Meal, Ken Backus, Matt Smith, of course, Jill Carver, and Dan Young, and myself as a pretty powerful lineup, and it's been received very, very well. So we're excited. It's going to be a good time, and I'm looking forward to it because I always enjoyed teaching. I know I learned from teaching, forced me to be conscious of the things I had learned from others and be able to express it. And also there's the feeling that there is responsibility to give back what was given to you. So that is also a part of the process.
Ralph, there's a lot of people who are listening to this who have discovered plein air painting through the PleinAir podcast. We have a total of, I think, over 158,000 people now who have listened to this show. And so we're seeing massive amounts of people showing up at the plein air convention, never having painted, coming there to learn for the first time. But they don't necessarily have the history and understand some of the acronyms. Now, you talk about PAPA, which is the PleinAir Painters of America group. You want to talk a little bit about that group, because really before this movement really blossomed, it really kind of was held together and almost restarted with the PleinAir Painters of America. Can you tell us a little bit about the group?
Yeah. Papa was born in about 1986 on Catalina Island by primarily a ladies' group of painters there, and they were having great fun, and they had quite a captive audience, and were doing very well. And Denise Burns, who was our fairy godmother, if you will, she at one point realized that they had something there that could grow and be bigger, and she called on Kevin McPherson to see if he would try to take the group national, and he did, and Kevin stepped up, and he just basically put his hand on several of us and said, "You are now a PAPA member." And so we started doing our shows at Catalina, which was a wonderful opportunity. We paint all week like they do, and put our paintings up there in the casino building, which was a gorgeous venue. And my goodness, people from LA and from the island were just stampeding into our show and buying things so fast that we could hardly keep up with it.
It was quite a phenomenon. I was at the last one, and and I remember they had these people piled up and at the gate, and they opened the gate, and there's these round ramps, and people all ages, older people, just running up, and they ran in and looked at the paintings, and I think they sold about $300,000 worth of paintings in about 10 minutes. It was pretty incredible.
It is incredible. Unfortunately, nobody got hurt on that stampede, but it was a one-time thing. And of course, I don't know that it's ever been repeated to that level. But of course, then the next one, of course, was Laguna. And when Laguna picked up, they did a great job too, and they had a very popular show and still do, I think. Yep. So, but anyway, a lot of time has passed, and we were trying to move more towards a museum venue once the Catalina venue sort of dried up, or we should say it changed forms. And so as a group, we were sort of looking for new opportunities and new ways to present ourselves, and we did some museum shows and things like that. But we kind of reached a Rubicon here the last couple of years, and we needed to revitalize. So Matt stood up and said, "Okay, we're going to see if we can't get this group, to be more relevant again." And
you're referring to Matt Smith.
I am, and he and I had, were brought in with Kevin back in the when was that? Supers, real early '90s, anyway. And so he tapped me to be the treasurer secretary, which proved to be a bigger job than I planned on. But anyway, it's good, and we've got a strong board now, and we're trying to get things going again. And Matt's had some great ideas, and already got this booth museum, and we're going to have a group paint out in Glacier this fall, and a little show up there in Kalispell. And so we brought in 10 new great painters that are well known, at all the plein air shows right now. I can't list them all right at the moment, but there's just some wonderfully great young not so young, but young talent out there that we needed to bring into.
Yeah. I'm very pleased to hear that,
our
because
group.
PleinAir Painters of America has been such an important influence on the plein air movement. And it's really what got me brought into it is I went to a PleinAir
right,
Painters of America event it was either in Colorado or Old Lyme. I'm not sure which was first. I went to both. And that's when I actually had the realization that there's a movement that was beginning and that I needed to start a magazine. So,
right. And I remember our meeting at South Lake Tahoe, that one show there. And so, and things were just sort of beginning to happen in those days.
That's right. Well, that's when I first launched the magazine. I remember I brought a package of goodies to all the painters and said, "Hey, we're going to start this magazine." So that's been quite a while back. Anyway, congratulations on revitalizing. I think the group is extremely valuable, and it should be something that any painter should strive to be a part of, because obviously it's extremely vetted. You have to be invited in, but only the best of the very best get into that group. And it's certainly something for all of us to strive for. And, I got to work hard for another 20 or 30 or 40 years before I'll get invited in. But it's something pretty cool.
Some of us were fortunate to get in when it was easier. That's for sure. So you're correct that we do, strive for the highest quality artists that we can get, and some of which may not have any need for a group, but some enjoy the idea and the concept. And, it's always been a lot about camaraderie, but because the group started as a small family, but it's more and more and more about high quality. And we still want people that we like to be around, of course, and that's always the case. But I think we have a very strong and a very close-knit group, and we hope to will continue to grow. That's our intent.
Well, and I think that's important. There are people who will complain or whine about being exclusive or being excluded, as the case might be. But it's very important that standards are held high in everything that we do, not only in plein air, but in all painting. It's important that all events are very careful about vetting people in and making sure that they're that they're getting the absolute highest quality they can possibly get for their event, because otherwise the words plein air become to mean something other than quality, and we can't have that happen.
You're absolutely right, and art has to be held to a high standard at all times, or it's not art. And so, plein air is a way to develop your art, and it's a process that was been around for a long, long time. But the idea of competition in art, I have a little bit of a problem with, even in gallery shows or museum shows. But because competition is not really, it's an American thing. We want to make everything a competition, but in reality, art is a very, very personal and independent thing, and you do your vision of the world and you do it your way. But standards of technical capacities, technical ability, technical ways of composition and putting the paint down and mixing and colors and values and all of those things that have been tried and true, requirements for something to be considered artful or skillful, they have to be learned, and they have to be learned, from somebody that knows what they're talking about, because there are very few people talented enough to walk out there and make great art the first time they try.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely critical. So I'm curious. I heard a story that you went out painting for like a month, hiked deep into the mountains. Where was that? Nepal?
Yeah, I've done a number of mountains are my primary love. I've always been a mountain guy, and growing up in Colorado, of course, I've had the wilderness in my heart, and I travel constantly up and down the Rocky Mountain range. And I'd been, until I was 60 years old, I didn't get off the continent. I was going from Alaska to New Mexico to California to Montana to Idaho to Colorado and Wyoming, and doing all I could for that. But when I got the opportunity, artist friend of mine, Lee Stronczyk, when I lived in Bozeman, where he lived, invited me in 2010, after I'd moved back to Colorado, to go with him on this 35-day hiking, 200-mile hiking trek in Nepal, which was something I'd always dreamed of doing. I always wanted to see but I, had only just barely reached a point in my career where I thought I could afford to do that. So I took the opportunity. I went. It was one of the most fantastic experiences I've ever had, and I did. I hired my own porter. We had the trucking company to carry all our tents and our food and cook gear and everything, and they took really good care of us. But to carry my paints, I had to hire my own individual porter. Well, he carried that stuff for the whole trip, and believe me, it was the best money I ever spent, because those fellas are hardworking and they're very happy to have the job, and the money is very good for them, but it's really pretty minor to us in comparison. And so I was able to do 12 studies on the trail, and did develop a few of them into major pieces, and it was really a great experience, because I was painting something I had never seen before and never understood before. But it was a great opportunity.
So I'd like to talk about painting a little bit. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of people who listen who are kind of picking it up, trying to decide if they're going to do it. And of course, we have a lot of experienced people who are always looking for something else they can learn. What do you think are the key essentials that you try to impart on people when you are teaching, which I know you're not doing at the moment, or will be soon? Are there things that you see as patterns, mistakes that are made that people need to be thinking about?
Absolutely. I mean, the most common thing that I felt that people needed help with when they first began was to be able to see the values in outdoors. And the difficulty there is that light in the world gives us a range of values and a complexity of values that paint can't really duplicate exactly. You have to learn to see the world more simply, and that means learning to see values and their relationships. Relationships is what it's all about. Richard Schmidt, of course, one of the great painters of our country, his little movie that he made years ago called The Secret Squint, really was the key idea, because when you half close your eyes and you look at the world, things simplify, and it also lowers down the intensity. And in that sort of squint, you don't look at anything in particular. You look at the whole scene at the same time. And when you do that, then you're in your mind's eye, you can start comparing the simple values and the big shapes. And by finding a point of reference, be it your middle tone or your high tone or your dark tone, you can start from any one, but you have to have a point of reference that you can trust. And then every mid-tone that you want to use has to be in relationship to one of those points of reference. And so I tend to start with my darkest darks first, and I draw in my darks. And I've heard it said that the darks carry the drawing and the lights carry the color. So if you draw in your scene with your darks and establish your deepest tone, then you'll start finding your middle tones in relationship to your darkest tones, because you have the white of the canvas to give you your high end. So it's that relationship between one value and the next value and the value next to that has to be seen and understood well enough to put on paint. Now, one thing Wayne Wolf did in my very first workshop on PleinAir painting in 1987, which is where I met Matt Smith, and he took a white panel and he threw it out there in the field in front of us, and that bright white was sitting out there in the field of green, and it immediately told us how deep and rich even sunlight on the grass was in comparison to the bright white. And it set a keynote that made me realize that the world is actually a little bit richer and darker than you think it is, even on a sunny day. And so I tend to tell my people to start a little darker than you think it is, because it's easier to lighten a dark than it is to darken a light.
Right.
Once you get a bunch of white or yellow in your paint, you're never going to get it back to a deep tone. So it's easier to keep adding a little bit of white to a dark if you need to raise it.
Do you, in the beginning of a painting, do you even use any white, or do you kind of keep it out until you get to a certain level?
No, absolutely right. That is, like I said, I begin with my darks, I move into my middle tones, and I save my highlights for last. And in general, we know that darker tones are richer and deeper if they're left semi-transparent. They're not as opaque. And then you move towards your middle tones, they're a little more opaque, and then you move to your high tones, which are heavily opaque, because they have to cover things that are under them. And you can put those dashes of bright lights on top of things as your last notes. So there's that general progression. And that was one of the other things I tend to impose on people is to have a process that you learn and you develop and you use and you reuse each time, because if you do first things first, second things second, and last things last, you're a little less likely to lose control.
And what's your process? You're talking about darks, middles, and lights, but do you also have a process of starting with the sky and working closer and closer? How do you do that?
Well, when I hit the middle tones, I think quite often I will lay in a sky tone and move and come forward, but that's not necessarily, that's more about overlapping edges than, you can push in block in your major big shapes, in the middle tones after the darks, pretty much as you wish, color book fashion. And then you go back and you start doing your refinements of your color and value, and it is sometimes handy to work from back to front, so you do get the overlapping values. That's something that you can develop with your edges, at any time in the painting, but I think it's probably easier in a way to come forward, especially when you want to get the feeling of a mountain or a tree or something overlaying on top of the sky, and vice versa, and other elements the same way. You're putting something on top of something else, and the edges are very much about that, and the understanding of how edges create the character of the thing more than details within the body of the thing. You know what I'm saying? You can paint a mass of a bush as a solid mass, but if the edge of that mass has a few indications of something that says I'm kind of leafy, then you don't have to put a bunch of leaves in the middle of that shape. You just use the edge to define the character of the thing.
Tricks your brain.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully, that's right. So what about, that raises an issue. This doesn't get discussed very often, but there's something about putting the tops of a tree into the sky that always seems on a lot of paintings to be wrong. Do you have any advice for people on that?
Well, I think John Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, he talks about all these problems. Probably one of the best Bible books there is out there for anybody. But, he talks about how and many other sources, talks about how a turning form on top of a tree, which is basically a sphere and rounded, it's going to pick up skylight and high brightness of the light. So you can easily take a little value off of the top of a tree. The vertical sides are going to be darker, and the top's going to be a little lighter. And simply by lowering that value, you reduce the contrast between the sky and the tree. In other words, if it feels too intense, if your eye goes there all the time because of its high contrast or its sharp edges or its intense color, those are the three ways that you're going to be able to control where your eye goes. You either make the edges softer or sharper as you need them. If you want your eye to go there, make a sharp edge. You change the intensity of the color. If you don't want the attention going there, don't give it the brightest color. And of course, the value contrast, we also go to the highest contrast of the values. So if you want something to be less important, close up the values between the two shapes. So if I have a treetop, I'd rather usually, that's not important on this painting, I'd rather put a blue sky behind it than a white cloud.
Makes sense. Closing up the values.
You know, when I came back from Bozeman, Montana to Loveland, Colorado in 1995, and you know, Clyde was there and Wayne was there and a bunch of other good painters. In addition to all the sculptors that had gravitated to Loveland, Colorado, and it got so, you know, after I met Shirley and we got married, we started having dinner parties in which we were able to invite, you know, our artist friends in town, and so they would come over and Shirley would fix them a lovely dinner, and I would feed them some wine, and eventually I'd get brave enough to say, well, you guys want to come out to the studio and talk to me a little bit? And sure. So, you know, here we had dueling banjos and critiques because everybody's trying to be the, you know, get all my issues pulled out for me. So
that's hard.
And but it was also the most valuable thing that could have happened because, yes, it's difficult to hear it over and over again. But what became so valuable was that what I discovered was most of the time they were picking out the same things, the same general concepts. Where does your eye go in the picture? How does your eye travel through the painting? Is there a compositional pathway that you're trying to create, and is it working? And so they'd say, oh, this contrast is too strong, or this color is too strong, or that edge is too sharp, and things like that. And so after they had done that for me and beat me over the head with it so many times, eventually I started saying, oh, okay, I can self-critique now. I can tell where my eyeball goes, and if I want it to go there, fine. If I don't, I'm going to change it. You know, one of the greats, whose name I can't remember again right now, is you say, if you're going to tell me that my hat is more important than my head, by God, I'm going to take my hat off. You know?
So in terms of traveling of the eye, is there a, I hate the word formula because it sounds a little, I don't know, formulaic, I guess, but is the intent to travel the eye in a circle? Is it to travel the eye to the back, to the focal point? I would assume that's what you're referring to.
There's an infinite number of ways that you can. The theory is that what you want to do is, first of all, grab a person's attention. You can walk down a gallery wall, and 90% of them won't attract your attention, but all of a sudden one, bam, grabs your eye. And you go to that painting, and you look at it. And without knowing it, your eye is going to start moving through this painting in a pathway that the artist was consciously constructing for you. Because not only do you want to grab his attention, you want to keep it as long as possible and keep it within the painting. You know, if the lines of the composition take your eye off the side of the painting, you're just going to move on over to the next painting. So there are numerous ways that you can bounce the eye through a painting. But the trick is that you want to keep them moving within the painting. So, and it usually means that there's a cyclic nature where you come back to go, because that go point is normally your point of most power, or your center of interest. But you also have to have the rest of the painting support that center of interest in a way that it entertains the eye as it moves around, but it comes back to that point and starts you over again. So there's no real formula. It's something that you develop, you know, in your own composition with the elements that you have to work with. Clyde used to talk about dot value pattern relationships. And a dot value pattern is a series of, or any contrasting value note, a dark note in a light area or a middle tone area, or a light note, you know, in a middle tone area. So that those contrasting points are where your eye jumps to. And so you design your painting with those things in mind, because they can actually take your eye to the place you want it to go. And so dot value patterns are something that Clyde talked about that I found to be extremely helpful in composing a painting.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I thought I'd heard it all, and I've learned so many things. I'm sitting here scrambling notes, writing notes down. This is fascinating.
Again, if those guys hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known it.
Well, that's how we all learn, I guess. I guess sometimes they learned it from somebody, and maybe through experimentation. Well, before
Absolutely.
we wrap up, do you have any particular final thoughts or anything that we haven't discussed that maybe we should?
Well, I don't know. Just the personal things of a career, and for me, I'm still evolving. I'm still changing, and my newfound love is painting glacial mountains, things with glaciers on them. And so I've been traveling to and painting more and more of that kind of country, although at my age it's getting a little harder to get there, but I still do. And so that's been, because of the melting of the glaciers that I'm noticing, that I've seen in my 50 years being outdoors, I can already see the changes that are happening and going to continue to happen. And so just like Charlie Russell wanted to record the passing of the cowboy, I'm interested in painting the passing of the glaciers. So I've had the opportunity to go to Switzerland and to Nepal and of course the Canadian Rockies and Alaska, and I'm spending as much time pursuing those ends as I can, because to me that's a subject that needs to be addressed, and of course from my own personal interest, the mountaineering thing goes along hand and foot with that, because obviously the early mountaineers are someone that needs to be remembered and recorded, who were climbing these mountains a long time ago. So that's an interest of mine that's kind of new, and I still love the wildlife and I still love the mountains of all kinds, but I'm looking for new things to do too, and you need to keep yourself excited and moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, Ralph, this has been a pleasure today. I've learned a lot, and I think we could probably go on for much more time if we had it. And I'm just honored that you would do this. I want to thank you on behalf of all of our listeners for the inspiration, not only today, but the inspiration just looking at your paintings. I would encourage everybody to look at your website. What is your website?
It's ralphoberg.com.
Okay, that's easy, ralphoberg.com. But to look at those paintings, and of course, if you can find a way to see them in person, where could that take place?
Well, my primary galleries are Trailside and Wind River up in Sun Valley, Paderewski's in Vail, Colorado. Hopefully there's not many there, but unfortunately some of them do hang around. Come to my studio.
Well, they're still good. Go see them. Go buy them.
More yeah. Thank you, Eric, for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it very much myself.
Well, I'm honored. Well, thanks again to Ralph Oberg. He is a legend, unbelievable painter. Check out his website. Check out his work. Today's podcast was sponsored by the PleinAir Convention in Santa Fe, coming up right away. If there are still seats, you can find out at PleinAirConvention.com. And, of course, we will reveal at the convention where we're going next year. And the people at the convention always get the best possible lowest price deal. We reward them for being there. So you'll learn all about it if you're there. This podcast is sponsored also by the African Painting Safari. If you want to go to Africa and paint with us, we're in September. Check it out, AfricanPaintingSafari.com. And one more thing to check out, I've got a new thing called Sunday Coffee. It comes to you every Sunday morning, and it's kind of my impressions on life and art and lots of other things. Anyway, it's just something different. You might check it out, coffeewitheric.com. PleinAir continues to be red hot, and PleinAir Magazine continues to be the top-selling art magazine, Barnes & Noble. Thank you for that. Drop by, pick one up, or better yet, get your own bi-monthly subscription for about half of what you'd pay on the newsstand at PleinAirMagazine.com. I always have fun doing this. Thanks for being here today. We'll see you next week. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a great big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye.